I think just a good way to start off is my experience with, like I took college courses back in 2009, 2010, and I really went just to compare notes. I wanted to see what they were teaching in school after like about 10 years of me like privately doing my own research into many subjects. So I took astronomy and economics, and geology was one of the classes I took. And so from what I remember about geology, it was all basically the same story. It was sedimentary layers, different types of layers stacking on top of each other over millions of years that were then shaped and formed by the wind and the water. And that's basically, if I could, aside from volcanic stuff, that's basically what you learn in school as far as geology.
Yeah.
I was almost 40, and most of the people in my class were young kids, and I was just kind of there to observe, like I said. But a lot of these young kids would question that story. They could recognize how silly it seemed, and I just remember the geology professor would get very angry and irate at any people questioning his story. I thought I'm really glad I did that, because it was a great experience. So having said that, I'd like to ask you if I got anything wrong on that, and then give everyone sort of your background of science and education.
Sure. The technical term for that is petrogenesis, which is the origin of stone, right? How stone forms. So you were describing one aspect of that, which is the sedimentary layering, and then you have igneous, metamorphic, and the sedimentary layering. These are the three kinds of rock. Igneous being lava, volcano, and sedimentary, what you described. And then metamorphic would be after all of the sedimentary layers have compressed over millions and millions of years, then you get this melting because of the pressure and the heat, and then those different elements from the different layers start to fuse together, and that gives rise to these these rocks that we see with all the swirling formations in them that don't really make sense from a sedimentary perspective. That's how those are explained.
Right. And then the other thing I think it's important is for those that don't understand, the modern peer review method of science that we have today, as opposed to, and correct me if I get this wrong, because I know you have years in a scientific background and I don't, but from what I understand, the pure scientific method that was once practiced would state that if your theory can work out and prove itself, then you can use it as a working model. But even when you have a working model, which would be considered the highest thing you could get to in the sort of scientific theory, it's still, you cannot be looked upon as scientific fact. It's just simply a working model. You have to stay open to the possibility that new information might come in and break that model and learn, that way you're staying open and you're always sort of, being honest about it. Whereas the peer review method of science is simply like, I have a theory and I sent it off to 3 of my buddies that I went to frat school with, and they all stamped, yeah, that sounds good to me. And now it's in the textbooks. That's a bit of a,
I think
summary,
you're kind of describing the difference between consensus science and experimental science, where there's some
now.
Yeah. So what you're describing, peer review, in my opinion, that's supposed to be the highest level, where you have these meta studies, these double-blind randomized controlled trials, and it's all reviewed by the top scientists in that field and maybe a few scientists outside of the field. And that's, they're like the gatekeepers that are deciding what information comes through and what doesn't. And so in my opinion, peer review by definition is a logical fallacy when it comes to science, because it's appeal to authority. So basically, if you get a bunch of, tried and true, what do you call them? The professors, the tenured professors that are in a position of power and are, have a vested interest in a particular narrative, they can easily block out anything that might challenge that. So that's one aspect of it.
Someone might even say that it was designed. That's the whole reason it's designed that way, because the whole peer review thing doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It's
I believe so.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into the fun stuff. I was telling my audience about all your work, but I've been saying we're going to just focus on mostly the trees, but I wanted to start with the hearts, just because I find that it just inspires me. And it's just so strange. So if you don't mind, maybe you could get into telling us about these fossilized hearts. Actually, before I am going to edit in some videos here on the science of petrification. When I first saw this stuff, I thought I saw it through Mud Fossil University, I think is what it's called, years ago. And I mean, I thought the guy was a great presenter. I thought it was very interesting, but I'm thinking, this is silly. This is ridiculous. And it's just, now I realize it's because I didn't understand the science of petrification. And once I started looking into it, even on the Wikipedia, it's not hard to petrify anything. I mean, if you could do it in your own controlled experiment, it seems like a flooding of certain chemistry could petrify things. Heat and pressure can petrify things. A lot of my listeners, a lot of people listening to this are people that have been looking into cataclysms of the past. That kind of explains all sorts of petrification. And so once I realized the ease of petrifying things and the reality and the science behind it, the only real question that's left with the heart is why is the heart seem to be more prevalently found as like a petrified artifact than anything else? That's my.
Well, you're talking about something that's based on my findings and theories and what I've presented. That's not mainstream thinking whatsoever. In fact, mainstream thinking would go against that and tell us that soft tissue doesn't petrify. This is why we find fossilized bones, and only in the rarest circumstances does soft tissue petrify. And the reason they tell us for that is that the larvae and the bacteria that would normally be eating away at the flesh are, they're gonna have their way with the tissue long before any petrification could take place, because they're telling us that petrification is taking place over millions and millions of years. And it's just not, that may be true in some cases, but there's so many examples of instant petrification or rapid petrification out there that when you're going to school and studying geology, you're not hearing about these things. You're hearing about what you were describing, the sedimentary layers, tectonic activity, banging plates together, forming the mountains. And then those layers that are formed are going to trap different plant life and animal life in them. And those are going to be compressed. And then there's going to be this slow leakage of time, of minerals and elements into those tissues over long periods of time as the gas and water works its way out. That's the mainstream narrative, but they're telling us that happens over millions and millions of years.
Yeah.
And there's so many examples of instant and rapid petrification that we'll get to in a little while. When I start presenting, I can show some of the evidence for this. But I mean, you've got examples of fish eating other fish that are fossilized, and it's like, how does that happen, where you can see them in the process of consuming a meal, but they're petrified? So clearly the petrification happened quickly. There's a place, I can't remember, I think it's in North Dakota or South Dakota, where there's this big chamber that was found that had all kinds of different animals that were petrified into it, including loads of mammoths. And they're petrified to limestone, but all of the slurry flow around them is also limestone. It's like this micro layering of limestone. So it doesn't make sense that there was this slow deposit over long periods of time that petrified these creatures, because it just wouldn't work. So the surface, the substrate around them petrified to limestone, but they also petrified to limestone. So yeah, there are examples of tree stumps. You asked me in one of the emails, and I sent you a link from a video by Thunderbolt's project, a guy named Mungo Jupp. He did a video, I think it's called Instant Petrification, or no, Instant Fossilization. And he describes in that video an event where high tension power lines went down and they laid across multiple tree stumps. And the power wasn't cut from these lines when the tower fell. And so the current was running through these stumps for something like 6 hours. And then after that, they found that these tree stumps had turned to stone, but not just the stump, the entire root structure had turned to stone. So these are things that, I mean, I never had any college level courses in geology, but I took a bit of an interest in it, but I found it to be a really boring subject. I was always far more interested in space, the final frontier, as a kid. And the last thing I was interested in was, looking at a bunch of rocks and archaeology seemed about the most boring profession that I could think of, digging around in the dirt to, using brushes to uncover rocks. And, now it's, there's so much that's opened up, and it's one of the most interesting subjects I can imagine.
I think so too. And to me, it all goes back to Cataclysm. It always has, really, since I had my red pill moment, for lack of a better word. Every rabbit hole I've ever gone down for the past 20 years has always ended in Cataclysm for me. My listeners are well aware that that's kind of where my head always goes. And this, everything you're telling me about, like rapid petrification and stuff, and that does seem to be the biggest cover up, that and the spirit, and covering up, like the spiritual nature of who we are, is the Cataclysm. I think that's how I see it. And so these stone hearts that you're studying, modern official science would just say that these are river rocks, right? They're like sedimentary stone that over millions of years.
Exactly. The official story on these stones is that you have different clay deposits that get trapped in another flow around them, and then as those are being compressed, and they start to turn into metamorphic stone, which I was describing before. So that's a much harder stone. Sorry, my monitor's about to go off there.
And Mud Fossil University sent some samples in and came back human DNA, correct?
Yeah, that's a different aspect. Well, he's talking about the concept of mud fossils. Now, if you look at mainstream theories on petrification, they're talking about paramineralization, which is this infiltration of elements, which I described before. So the primary difference between what Mud Fossil University is showing and what the mainstream narrative is talking about is time scale.
Right.
He's shown that he claims to have petrified a chicken wing in a matter of 6 months. Now, how would you do that? Well, if you surround things with mud and you surround them with a bit of salt water and you add a current, according to him, within 6 months you've got something that's petrified. There are lots of different examples. For example, Lake Natron is a place where there's high mineral content waters, and that lake, if the animals fall in, they die. They don't get back out, and they petrify within a very short amount of time. They become encased in the minerals, and then eventually those minerals work their way in. Same thing with a place called Mother Shipton's Cave it's in England. Mother Shipton's Cave has this high mineral content waters that are falling in a waterfall, and people go there and they hang different things from ropes, and the water comes down the rope, and then it goes over the different objects that people have brought there. And within a few months, they're already encased in a mineral, and they're moving more and more towards petrification. I show lots of examples of these in my videos, but that's just with high mineral content water. So if you add the mud to it, that's going to be another infiltration of different kinds of elements. And the DNA analyses, he sent off a few different samples to what was supposedly a reputable lab, and those lab reports are available on his website. So those came back humanoid DNA. So you would think that would be of interest to geologists and to the different universities, but he doesn't really get the time of day when he communicates with any of those people. But he also has a lot of ideas that most people who are not red-pilled into a whole bunch of different subjects would consider to be totally crackpot ideas. It has to do with Titans and other subjects that that I heard in a recent podcast of yours that are of interest.
Yeah, giants. And I think a lot of people are now starting to recognize the reality of giants in the past. And so that used to be more crackpot than it is now. COVID, I think, has helped really open people's minds up, the whole COVID era. And once you start realizing the reality of giants, which is pretty well documented, I mean, even Abraham Lincoln was writing about it in his memoirs, like people were open about it just a 100 years ago. Once that seems acceptable, then Titans obviously is in a stretch. And then you look at like mountains. The biggest joke in geology class was mountain forming, from what I remember. Like I can see sedimentary layers over time. You know, that kind of makes sense. But then they say mountains are just these things kind of going up like that. That's just, you know, and you look at a mountain and you can just tell by looking at a mountain that that doesn't make sense. You would get a pile of rocks if that was the case.
I can show some visuals while we're talking
That'd be
without,
great.
without going
Yeah.
into presentation mode. I can just,
Yeah.
let me see, where do I do this? Because
While
I'm
you're
not familiar
looking
with
in,
Zoom. Let's say I can screen share, but also one thing is I'm just seeing you big. It'd be, if I
oh,
could see us side by side or something. What is that view? Is that gallery? Is that how? Ah, there we go.
do zoom that.
That's better. I
Okay.
got it. Okay. All right. It was a little.
You can take control and show. Yeah.
So let's see. Screen 2. Let me just do that. Share there, and now you. So you see my channel there?
I see that. Yeah. Okay. There you go. That's perfect.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So that's the YouTube channel. So I'll just get myself.
See right there. There's a perfect example. Now, geology tells you this is like being pushed up from tectonic movement below. It doesn't explain that.
Yeah, which is interesting because all around it is flat for the most part. So it just kind of, what did it do? It just jutted upward magically. It's kind of
Right.
kind of an anomaly, if you ask
Yeah.
me. But let me let's see here. Let me just go for some, just because you were talking about different kinds of mountainous structures. There's so many anomalous things that when you think about the mainstream narrative, they'll just say this is sedimentary layering.
Yeah.
So is that.
Wow, I haven't seen that one. Now they don't say that's petrified wood.
No.
That's crazy because I mean, just one
Yeah.
glance, I'm like, that's a giant piece of petrified log. That too.
I'm just going to show a bunch of random, wild geological formations, and you can just ask yourself if that petrogenesis story makes any sense with this stuff. Now, some of these things, some people think this is a structure of some sort. It could be. But, when you start to get these flows, this is what I never really thought about before. I haven't mentioned it, but I'm a chiropractor. So I studied a lot of anatomy in school. And are we on the screen at the same time as this is happening? Because
yeah, I think so. I see
more fun for people.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't see anybody here. There we go. All right. So, I mean, there's just so many things that are really, really difficult
officially, what is that? What's that officially?
I have no clue. I don't even know where that is, but
that is like the bone that you showed. That to me, that's a perfect example.
Trabecular bone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So some of this stuff, you could explain with sedimentary layering, and other stuff is just like, what the heck happened? And, is this cellular structure? Is this part of a tissue? It's, the mainstream narrative to me falls short, because how does sedimentary layering give you concentric circles like this? And given enough time, I'm sure they'll come up with a clever explanation for how this stuff comes about. But it's just astonishing. These are salt caves, and to me, I've got a video very recently on my channel where I cover this topic. Our salt mines giant tree, because it just it makes a lot more sense when you see the tree grain, and when you look at things like this. How does the sedimentary layering explain that?
Yeah. Do you know about the salt mines under Lake Erie?
Somebody mentioned those in one of the comments on that last video that I did, and I haven't had a chance to check them out. There's Lake Erie. I think Lake Huron has that as well. There's a bunch of them. So I wanted to show, some of these examples of just really bizarre geology that to me now makes a whole lot more sense if you think of it as biology. And I coined the term biogeology because I felt that mud fossils was, while that could apply to a certain aspect of what was being found, there were a whole bunch of things, especially related to instant petrification, that weren't explained by mud fossil theory. And it was also kind of misleading people about how things could happen, because it wasn't taking that catastrophic instantaneous element into consideration. So I see biogeology as more like it's an ology, and then that divides into a lot of different things, which could be instant petrification, mud fossils, fossilization through mineral water, electric plasma, all of these different things that
including soft tissue, like you did mention, and it's out there in your videos. You can see that that is a fact that you can petrify, living soft tissue. So like what we're looking at here almost looks like some type of cellular fatty something or other.
yeah.
Biological for sure.
Whereas this looks a whole lot like tree and root structures.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so magnificent. I didn't know about most of these places I'm showing before I got into all this. I've learned more about geology and the physical world in the last few years than I have in my whole life. These are called polystrate fossils, which are said to be trees that are upright, and you have all these layers. So if we think of that all those millions of years, how does the tree project upward through those layers? It's
Yes.
kind of a conundrum that that can happen the way they're telling us. It's easy to get lost in these images because there's just so much what forms this.
That's what my light went off when you started getting into geodes, because I've always been into crystals. Crystals are beautiful. Geodes are really wild, especially when the first time I saw a geode that wasn't cracked open, like I was at some place and you could buy, geodes that were intact and you could kind of take them home and crack them open yourself.
Yeah.
And that really got me thinking, like, what are these?
Yeah, these concentric circles are they seeds? Are they giant fruit? If you're thinking of giant trees, which we'll get into, but geodes, I cover that a lot in this video here, opals, geodes, and the great trees. I didn't know that opals can be grown synthetically, as can rubies can be made, diamonds can be made. All this can be done synthetically in laboratories, but nature is doing it as well. But we're told that a diamond is forming under millions of pounds of pressure for 1 million years, and it turns a lump of coal into a diamond. And I no longer believe that's what happens. I think it happens very quickly, and it's as a result of probably plasma or lightning. There are things called fulgurites where the lightning hits the sand, yeah, and it creates this fractal thing that comes up out of the sand. And when you look at that structure, it's transmuted elements. It's gone from being sand, silica to something else. And it may just be vitrification, where the sand has started to melt as a result of the heat. But there's lots of examples of transmutation of elements. There's both biological transmutation, and there's also electrical transmutation. And biological transmutation is a very interesting idea. It looks like one of the heartstones. Because that's totally impossible in the mainstream model. This idea, we're told that in order for all these elements that we're seeing that make up all of this to come into existence, requires supernovas and exploding stars that then eject their materials out into the cosmos, and then those eventually start to accumulate. It starts as a nebula, and then somehow magically gravity brings that all together into a bunch of perfect spheres, or into fiery furnaces. That's the mainstream story. Those furnaces get too big, and then they eventually supernova. And so that's where the elements are coming from. The bigger the star, according to the mainstream narrative, then the more of this transmutation is going to occur of the initial elements of hydrogen and helium. Those are going to become more and more complex, giving rise to our periodic table of elements. So that's one story.
You're saying biological vitrification is what you're saying is the
biological transmutation is just a fact. So for the simplest example I like to use is a chicken egg. A chicken is consuming food throughout the day, and every day it produces an egg. Well, that egg shell is almost entirely calcium, right? And so the question is there enough calcium in the chicken's diet to create that shell? And the answer, according to research, is no. So where's the calcium coming from?
There's a this is a side note. I was a student of yoga for many years, and there's a yoga practice called a mono diet where what you're supposed to do is just pick one food, doesn't matter what it is, and eat it for at least 30 days and just observe what your body does. And the idea behind it is you're supposed to recognize that if you give your body enough time, your body will just sort of adapt and somehow magically produce whatever your body needs, no matter what you give it, you know?
Hmm. These are salt mines, and
These look
sure
more like
sure looks
trees
like
than,
tree to
oh
me.
yeah. It almost looks like they took massive pieces of plywood to shore up the sides, you know, like, but that's the actual salt.
I'll get to the real tree evidence in a little bit, but yeah. So you know, these are just salt mountains, salt mines. These are found all over the place. This I did a video called Spelunking Titanic Trees. So I've got my videos here, and then there's a live tab. I've done a bunch of live streams where I cover a lot more information in a, you know, more compact presentation. But Spelunking Titanic Trees is a video that I did that's very interesting. And when you look at the giant formations that people are doing cave diving into, it looks identical to this. And I believe they're the water channels for the great trees that they're actually diving down into.
I saw that one. That one was great.
Yeah. So, and then when you look into like there's marble caves is another really fascinating one. Let's see if I've got that here. Yeah. Same kind of thing, but now that all those last images I showed, those were made of salt. This is made of marble.
Wow.
And so in
Wow.
my
That's marble?
that's marble. Yeah.
Wow.
So in my opinion, we're seeing the same thing, but the process of petrification was different.
Yeah.
And so this resulted in marble, whereas the other thing resulted in salt.
Yep.
Could have been a very porous tree that was infiltrated by a lot of the, you know, when you talk about cataclysm, you have to, even mainstream geology acknowledges that there's been like 5 major dyings off. So we've
Yeah.
had these cataclysmic events that involve flooding, and they claim asteroid strikes and all of these different things. But the, you know, major waters, they find seashells at the top of Everest, and they claim that that's because at one point the flood waters were so intense that they went over the tallest mountains on Earth.
Yeah.
And that kind of ties into the whole Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson narrative with the comet strike during the Younger Dryas period that supposedly just changed the face of the Earth as we know it.
When I see images like this, and I've been seeing a lot of this lately on your channel, what I think of, like you were talking about 5 different destructions, you know, the Hopis talk about 5 suns. I think the Vedas have a similar number of destructions. I think there was a time when there was giant trees, and then there was a time when some other people made homes out of those trees, which is like what we're looking at in these carved homes out of wood, which is pretty awesome. And then those wooden homes, those wooden trees got then petrified and turned into mountains and stuff.
Well, I'm not sure if it's the Bible or the Book of Enoch. One of those texts talk about the angels going to work at the trees. So the trees were downed, and then those trees laid for a long time, decomposing to varying degrees before the great flood came. So that would make perfect sense. I think you're talking about the Avatar days. I think there's a reason that was the most popular movie in the world, that they're you know,
like the Matrix, it was speaking to everyone at a deep level. The you know, Avatar was hugely popular. A lot of it had to do with those trees.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the micrograin, you can see the concentric rings, everything about this screams tree. And now sandstone is soft. You can carve into sandstone. There's all kinds of sandstone dwellings, and some of them may be more recent. But there's different examples which I've done. I did a video looking at some are claiming that a lot of these structures are geopolymer, which I don't believe for a second.
No, I agree.
And that was let's see, show that here again. Bring this back up. there. So yeah, this one here, I don't know, biogeology, geopolymers and lies. I go into the whole sandstone layering, and I present the alternative theories and why I think that when we're seeing all this sandstone and the structures that are inside sandstone, what we're really seeing are dwellings that were carved when the trees were still soft.
That's the one I think I saw. That was where I was. Yeah, where I saw.
Yeah, and when you look at these different mesas, you know, that exist. I can't remember which state it's in the US, but there's all kinds of articles. You mentioned Ben, you know, waking up with analog, the archivist.
Yes, I think that's how I discovered you, was through your podcast with him.
Yeah, so Ben has shown a whole bunch of different articles from turn of the century. So they're you know, they ring true. They're beautifully written, and there's so much detail, and it doesn't sound like some crackpot with the, you know, the National Geographic of the day that was trying to fool people into believing stupid stuff. And he's shown articles where the cave systems in these mesas and in different places, maybe not here specifically, but in different places that have been reported on, that those go hundreds of miles in. And the underground tunneling systems around the world, we saw this with Hancock's series. He's talking about Darren Kuyu, he's, you know, Turkey, these layers of cities, just one below the other, like three layers deep, and tunneling systems everywhere. The more you get into this stuff and you learn about things like star forts and the tunneling systems and the old world cities, and how much is underground, and what the mainstream narratives were about who created them, when they created them, how long a period of time and they created them, and it all just falls apart. And then you go back with work like Ben's from the Archivist, and the newspapers are telling entirely different stories than what we've been fed in school just 100 years ago. But those, just like the medical system was taken over, so was the publication system. You know, you've got the Rockefellers taking over publication and journalism and everything. They did the same thing with the medical schools. You know, so it's a fascinating world we live in. But anyway, I think this, if we go back to looking at trees, we can look at some fresh trees real quick here, just to help people wrap their minds around this, because it's a pretty hard subject to really grasp. If you take cedar, which is what a lot of the ancient texts say the great trees were made of, I think just like all of our trees we have now, they probably all existed then too, and some were probably a lot bigger than others. But this would be your sandstone layering. So if you think of this rotated like that, you've got these bands that are darker and then lighter, and the lighter is going to be harder structures. So this would be probably like what I was just showing, those mesa cliffs would be made out of this kind of stuff. And then the softer stuff is going to erode away during the floodwaters when they're coming in. And you can see some great examples of that. If I go back to the sandstone dwellings, some would look at this and they would say, oh, that's a melted building. And I don't think so. There's nothing about this that says building to me. This looks like tree, and then this could totally have been eroded away by water flow.
Yeah,
I think that's far more likely. Same thing with this. And you can even see the tree grain underneath. So some are going to say, oh, this is all brick and it all melted. And I've seen some examples of melted buildings where the brick is actually vitrified.
Yeah.
You have to have vitrification if there's been melt. That's just the way it works. You know, that's how glass is made. We take sand, we melt it, it vitrifies. That's the word for glass, right? So vitrification is glassification, really. And so I think that there's definitely something in the whole meltology thing also, but they're trying to apply it to too many things. And absolutism, when it comes to this kind of stuff, is a disease.
Oh yeah.
You know, people are constantly trying to you know, they latch onto a pet theory, and then suddenly everything is that theory. And I'm
of the problem with the official science. I mean, that's a dead end.
Yeah, there it's compartmentalized also,
Yeah.
just like, you know, everything else. And you get all these experts that are afraid to make any comments outside of their realm of expertise. Like, you know, the more the information I've been sharing, you know, catches on, it's like I'm suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect, pareidolia, cherry picking, you know, all of these, the classic mistakes that pseudoscientists make. And that's how they approach all of this when they're criticizing my work, but they're also not addressing any of the empirical evidence or how systematic you know, I've gone in looking through all of these things. But you know, I'll admit it, when it comes to geology, I've got the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is all new to me.
Yeah.
You know,
What is a Dunning-Kruger effect?
it's basically when you learn a little bit about something, you think you know a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
And you and all of a sudden you think you're an expert.
That's the
And so
human effect.
yeah. Yeah.
You claim to have coined the phrase paradigm blindness, correct?
I went looking on YouTube and I found one other link to it was a study that was totally unrelated to how I was using the term. So
I used it 6 months ago, which is a lot more recent than you. And I can tell you exactly where I heard it from a girl on YouTube. She's got a channel called the Alchemist, I think. And I just thought it was a perfect saying. I remember, so I used it in one of my videos 6 months ago. But that was a good.
I've been using that for a few years now. So whether or not, you know, I was the first, I don't know.
Yeah.
So we kind of got onto the tree thing because, you know, that's just how the conversation went. So we can come back to the hearts. I can go as long as you want.
Let's look at the hearts for a little bit and then jump back into the trees, just because some of the hearts you show, I still like when you point out the anatomy and how the anatomy all lines up. Yeah, I can't argue with that. But there are some samples that you have that straight up look exactly like it's ripped out of a body and turned into, you know what I mean?
Right. Well, I'll just show some of the best right off the bat. So just so people know what we're talking about here. Yep. So this, the bottom portion, you can see there's a cleavage here where the bottom of this rock is broken off. So that would have had a curve that would have continued around. So this would have been an absolutely gorgeous specimen. And it's actually showing you see my mouse, right? As I'm doing this? Yes. Okay. It's actually showing the coronary artery. There's something called, so the artery would lay here, and then underneath the artery is an indentation called the coronary sulcus, and that's where it sits.
Yeah.
So this one I'm not entirely sure about, but I think it's a beautiful picture, so I include it. So some of these are full-blown red meaty, and some of them are bone white, and I'll explain why that would be in a little bit. But most of these ones I'm showing now are not even my specimens. These are things. These are images that others have sent to me, and so when you know the basic anatomy of the heart, what you have is the main two heart muscles, which are the ventricles, the right and the left ventricle. And then you have the atriums. And these are like fatty flaps that fill with blood before going into I'm not going to say the pumping part of the heart, because the heart isn't a pump.
Right.
We can get to that also. Yeah. But the aorta and the vena cava, these all of these flaps, they basically in Cataclysm are gone. Whether they're burned away or whether they dissolve, I don't know. Like I initially, when I first got on this subject, I was thinking this was mud fossils. But as I started to find these stones and recognize that there was a lot of anatomical features in them that shouldn't be there based on random erosion and bumping around in a river bottom, right? Because that's, you asked me before.
Yeah.
Compressed layers, metamorphic rock is what they say this is, right? It's on its way to metamorphic because there's been so much pressure. Then as those layers are exposed, these rocks just pop out, and then they end up in river bottoms where they get beaten up and eroded through mineral erosion and whatever else, right?
Yeah.
And I just reject the notion.
Yeah.
when seeing these stones. The whole thing began with this one. And this is the aorta, and the vena cava opening. And this is the other side of that stone. That's not the best picture of it though. Where can I find? Let me go
But
to
the
a
holes
different.
all line up to the anatomy, what you're saying.
Yeah, this fatty thing is
Yeah,
we can look at
yeah, you can see the fatty thing there.
yeah, we can look at some fleshy hearts just by just to compare. Right. So this is the fat. Hearts come in lots of different shapes. Sorry, there's going to be some gruesome pictures here. But you know, this is an elephant's heart. It's a big blob. This is a giraffe's heart, and it's long and narrow. And so it's very common with this fatty area, but it's also very common with a fatty outer layering. This is called the pericardium, and the heart has the thickest of the protective layers of any organ. And this ties into my theories about how these stones came about. And I call it boiled egg theory, for lack of a better term, because my understanding when I realized that it couldn't be mud fossils, because there was no reason why the body would petrify and then the organs would be found separate from the body.
Right.
So my assumption early on was that the outer portions of the body were being annihilated in some way. And so how that could be happening initially, it was just, you know, well, it's still theory, but I was leaning towards volcanic activity, because a pyroclastic flow can leave a volcano at the speed of sound and have temperatures that are 1500 degrees Celsius. So that sounds like something powerful enough to annihilate a body. Well, if the heart is, the reason I call it boiled egg theory, if the heart is similar to an egg surrounded in this fatty material, then that's going to protect the heart. So what you have is a torso. Then you have a fatty chamber called the pleura, which is very thick, which is the chest and abdominal cavity, where the organs are floating, and they're floating in fluid, right? And then you have these individual sacs that are protecting the organ itself.
Yeah.
And so as the outer portion is being destroyed, what you're actually getting is a pressure cooker, right? You have the chest and abdominal cavities and that protective layering, and then these are floating in water. So anyone who's worked with a crock pot knows what a pressure cooker can do to food, and how, you know, you can turn bone to mush and then to gel in a matter of hours in a crock pot. And so that can explain also where the bones have gone. Why am I finding organs all over the place without the body?
Yeah. And hearts in particular. I have a woo-woo theory on that. Maybe I have a bit of a woo-woo theory on this. And this is one of the reasons I got really excited about the heart thing was you were talking about how the heart isn't a pump, it's opposite spin, spins the blood in opposing directions. I think you mentioned something.
I've got a 1 minute video I can play real quick here that I made that covers the topic if you want to hear it.
Yeah.
Or see it. So let me just make sure I don't blast anybody's ears out. Let me know how the sound is on this. That's pretty low for me. Is that low for you?
I don't hear anything.
Okay, I might have to share again. Let me stop sharing and then share with audio. I think you have to select, yeah, share sound. Good. All right. So let me know how this volume is. Did you know that almost everything
good?
That's good?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is an amazing discovery. I didn't know anything about this until I started finding these stones. And this isn't about stones at all. This is about the nature of the human heart, which is not what we were taught in school, not what I was taught in chiropractic college, not what most cardiologists are taught. They get this information as a little aside, even though it's actually fact. It's not theory. It's been undeniably proven, and you can see there's. Did you know that almost everything you were taught about the heart is wrong? Most everyone today, even doctors, still believe the heart to be a 4-chamber pump that pushes blood through a mind-boggling 60,000 miles of narrowing blood vessels to fuel our 40 trillion cells, then filling again as if by magic on relaxation.
Well, that theory was thoroughly debunked by the Spanish cardiologist Francisco Torrent Guasp back in 1972. After dissecting thousands of hearts, Guasp finally discovered the heart's true structure. The heart's far more amazing than we ever knew. It's like a rope, a long tube wrapped into a knot. Instead of being pushed, the blood is pulled through the heart in two spiraling vortexes. This has been proven with CAT scans, functional MRI, and positronic emission. Look at the spiraling contraction. It changes everything we know about the heart and circulation. If you'd like to know more, check out these videos. Did you know that almost everything you...
So I don't do...
Because I couldn't see it, but I'll edit that in.
That's called The Heart Is Not What You Think.
Okay.
Yeah, that...
what this makes me think of, because I didn't know this about the heart until I think it was the video that I saw with you in Analog. But I do know, like I was saying earlier, about a bit about yoga and all sorts of other sorts of spiritual practices and stuff. And so like the Tibetans have a practice where they try to wake themselves up every night in their dream state because they believe that when you die, you go to the same place you go to when you dream. So the dream state is a great place to practice that so that when you do die, you can activate your heart and consciously pass into that place, that realm with your coherence. Then there's the Merkaba, which is like activating your Merkaba, which is like a double, spin. I don't know how you call it, spinning in different directions.
Opposite rotating.
Yes.
Tetrahedrons.
Yes. Yeah. And so if the heart is doing that naturally, I mean, that's kind of like what the Nazis were doing with the bell when they were making the Die Glock. It was counter-rotational spin.
That's the Vimanas, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The Vimanas are powered off of that. And so my thought was, back in the day, it makes sense back in those days, the biblical days or whatever, that people were more in tune with their spiritual nature. They weren't as ignorant and blinded as we are today, that if in a time of a cataclysm, in a time of something like that, that's what you would do. You would activate your heart and get ready to go. And so maybe that's why these hearts, I mean, I know that's completely unscientific, but that might have added an extra layer of protection, because according to like the Die Glock and still that stuff isn't necessarily scientific because we're left with very little, but the little we do have describes it as some sort of creating some sort of bubble of time, space or whatever around the double spin thing. So maybe the heart's in this little bubble. Who knows? That's my little woo-woo thought on that.
Yeah, and there are examples of civilizations that just like vanished without a trace also.
Right.
You know, there's no evidence. Yeah, the Maya, there's no evidence of their bones or, so it's possible. Yeah, I think it's a interesting thing to ponder. And as far as the Vimanas, and this is it's such a deep subject, because it gets into the way in which water functions and flows. It gets into physics, plasma physics, it just one rabbit hole after another opens up when you start to get into this. And like I said, I was totally unaware of this phenomenon at all when I started with these studies. And let me just go back to the sharing there.
We can go deep into the trees now, if you'd like, unless you have more to share on the hearts. I just really wanted to let people get
let me just share this real quick and check.
Is this your collection?
Yeah, this is my collection. So this is this video is called just Petrified Hearts, and this is probably the best thorough go through I've done, where I'm just kind of covering all the bases. And you'll see here, I'm just going to show the very beginning of this, just do kind of a go through of a lot of the things that I've covered in many different videos. And those of you who have been with the channel for a while have certainly seen some of this this research and the evidence, the empirical evidence that I'm going to be presenting for you today. And I'll talk about the different categories of investigation that I've done with regards to these stones. It all began with this rock, which I found in a river bottom, and I've done a lot of videos talking about this, and all of the different anatomical features that this rock exhibits. So one of the interesting things about this is that it's white on the outside, and it has which is you know, consistent with the pericardium, that fatty layer. And everywhere that the stone is worn away, it's red underneath.
Yeah.
And that's common. But some of these are bone white. And I came across this not so long ago, which absolutely blew my mind. I didn't know about it. And let me just turn off the sound so we don't get a strike here. But this is known as decellularization. So they're actually growing organs now in a matrix, you know, of like petri dish organs. And when they're grown, they're entirely bone white, like ghostly white. And then watch as they introduce the blood. So most people, you know, think the heart is that redness of the heart. That's going to be a big portion of the heart. But the majority of the heart is actually the fatty, you know, like ligament tendon kind of material.
Right.
That's the matrix that the blood is inside of. So I think that there's compression that's happening. A lot of these are flattened out, and then also the blood is absent from them. So and so we've got all of these. It's scalable, this phenomenon, you know, the clay lump, the squished clay lump theory is kind of laughable when you see, remember in the video where he's rolling up the heart?
Yes.
Those fibers meet in different points, and those are called sulcus lines. And you can see that not only is the shape there, but the indentations are on the top of these as well. Yeah. And then you have the sulcus lines also. So you know, if you get into mathematics and you get into calculating the odds on things, if I give you a specific list of a bunch of different criteria that I would like you to find in a rock, and I tell you to go out and find that rock, the longer that list, the more impossible it's going to be for you to find it.
Yeah.
And that first stone that I was showing, that one I've gone into with endoscopic camera. I've looked at it with my microscopy. It's got over 20 different anatomical correlations. That one stone. Yeah. A lot of the stones that I have upwards of that. Many have 8, 9, 10. And that's already just astronomical from a mathematical perspective. Yes. So this is what is getting into. I don't have an experiment that I can point to because there's nothing. There's no manipulable variable. These already exist. They're there. They're empirical evidence that the mainstream tells us are clay lumps. And so what you should be doing. I made observations. I saw a pattern in nature that didn't make sense to me. Then I thought, okay, why is this pattern happening? Well, it sure matched anatomy. So when I brought the stone home, when I found it, I brought out the anatomy books that I had from college. And all of a sudden I found out like, whoa, there's a bunch of stuff that lines up. Then I started to have different hypotheses, and I made predictions. And one of those predictions was, if I can find one, I should be able to find others. And so I went out into the field and I went looking, you know, for more. And I started finding them in droves, because once the eyes were trained to spot it, now they would call that cherry picking, because I'm specifically looking for a particular shape. But I've shown enough here already. That's what's known as proof based on logical consistency, right? Okay. There's a logical reoccurring pattern. It's scalable. I've got all kinds of little ones here that I can show. It's the same pattern. Wow. Over and over again.
Yeah.
Right. There's the aorta at the top, just like the one that's on the screen, the big one there.
Yeah.
That's the back side is the one, the back is on the right, and that's the front.
Huh.
Sometimes they're very red. But the real mind blow for me when I saw that video that I showed before, the 1 minute heart video, is if you look here at the center of this, see the spiral contraction? That gets back into the vortexing. So you get a spiral contraction of the heart fibers, as well as a vortexing of the water. And right where it's paused there, there's if you're looking at it from the bottom, and from the bottom it looks like a propeller twist. And so even on these tiny rocks, see that little knife edge there?
Yeah.
And then the other side will be thicker, because that's your left ventricle. And then on the bottom, there's actually a little propeller twist there. So you've got the overall shape, you've got the openings at the top. I could show hundreds and hundreds of these over and over again, but you see it can be indentations, it can be openings, it can be discoloration, or it can be creases because the openings get pinched off. There at the top. Then you have this tapering in on the sides. When we die, we go into rigor mortis. The heart goes into contraction on death. All of the muscles contract. So with that contraction, you're going to get a tapering in on the sides of the heart, and you're also going to get this propeller twist at the bottom. So, you know, combined with sulcus lines, which that one has as well, you know, that combined with the propeller twist, combined with the openings of the blood vessels, now we're getting into astronomical numbers when it comes to the odds of something happening.
Yeah.
There's that knife edge, thick side, propeller twist. This one, same thing. There's your blood vessel openings at the top, right where they should be. Knife edge, thicker, propeller twist.
Yeah.
You know, so it's scalable. This, you know, it's scalable, it's repeatable, and so that I learned after learning about this, because here he's showing the line, and it was watching that the video. This doctor, his name is Francisco Torrent Guasp, and he's you know, he should have won the Nobel Prize while he was alive. He died 18 years ago. And he was the one who discovered the myocardial-ventricular band, which is this opening up. He dissected thousands of hearts. He didn't buy the official model on the heart being a little pump that's pushing blood out to the whole trillions of cells in the body. And so watching this documentary about his life and seeing these spirals and watching him put this heart back together after unraveling it, that was when I went, wait a minute, and I ran into the, you know, the other room where I store these, and several of these stones that I had both the spiral at the bottom, and they had the sulcus lines. This gets back to what I was talking about before, proof based on logical consistency. It's also known as specific complexity. It's when an object, event, or structure exhibits specified complexity, if it is both complex and specified. And I think I've demonstrated that that's definitely the case with these heart stones, and that the mainstream narrative doesn't make a whole lot of sense when it comes to that. This is a great explanation, just real briefly, of the heart not being a pump. You can pause that, and everything we were taught about the heart is, well, maybe not everything, but most everything we were taught about the heart was wrong. This is a doctor who's gone deep into the subject as well. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, I have a playlist for petrified organs, and another one. Oh, another thing. This is really gruesome. I'll show, but close your eyes if you don't want to see this. This whale is about to explode. When bodies are floating in the salt water for a long time,
Wow.
They expand, and then they explode their organs out.
Wow. And that guy caught the camera.
Yeah. So, you know, take that for what it's worth. Also, that's another, you got the bog bodies. There's a lot of reasons why organs might be found outside the body.
Yeah.
And a lot of reasons why they might be found preserved, and a lot of examples of that preservation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you've got the whole plasma, you know, apocalypse notion as well. This is the unveiling.
A massive flood with plasma discharge would kind of explain almost all of it.
Absolutely. Plasma physics, you know, let me just show some of the best tree evidence, and then we can get into the whole petrification and plasma thing, and I can look at my notes if there's anything else. So this is from a channel called Hangman 1128.
And he's got, because you turned me on to Hangman, I've been watching all his stuff, and my question is he showing us like official petrified wood? Like I find it crazy that what I'm looking at now isn't officially known as a petrified tree. Is it?
A mainstream geologist is going to tell you that this is it just looks like a tree.
Wow.
And it's random chance that it looks identical to a tree in every single way. And that even the sap is there, but it's
And like
now
it's
quartz.
mold almost, like you see mold on a tree, or like.
Well, this is mold. This would be like a lichen. This is recent growth. You can see this is you know what, before I get into hangmans, let me just go quickly.
I mean,
we'll do a little primer course.
Yeah.
Just so people know what they're looking at. This is how tree breaks down. See how these lines are straight, right? And they break and they cleave.
Little
so you've got all the vertical grain, but then you've got horizontal grain as well. But you don't perceive the horizontal grain when you're looking at a tree. But when the tree is breaking down, it definitely breaks down to that. And then it breaks down to forest, compost. It just it becomes the floor of the forest. So this is how tree is. And obviously this is softer material. So this is going to break down far quicker to forest, and this is going to take longer. And in the case of, we'll get to the petrified trees in a moment, normal petrified trees. So this is just a tree stump. A lot of times they hollow out from the center because the center seems to be the softest portion. And then the bark is a whole different phenomenon. And then on top of the bark, you have this layering.
The hollow center is important to remember, folks, because it serves the purpose of bringing water up to the tops of the trees, just like stems and plants and stuff.
Exactly, which is the next photograph. So you guessed that one well. So another thing to remember, if we're talking about trees, this is the thing, we haven't even mentioned this, but we're talking about trees here that are 4, 6, 8, 10 miles in diameter at the base. So that how many miles into the sky would they stretch? Well, if this is 6 miles across, that's a lot of miles going up. So there's, ironically, some of the biggest pushback on these ideas has come from other flat earthers, who are just like, there's no way that this has got any substance to it. And
that seems
it's really bizarre, but that's the, and then when they look at these photographs from what I'm going to show you from Hangman, they're just like, I see rocks. That's how rocks form. I'm like, are you a geologist? It's just weird. But anyway, so these are horizontal root structures that go out 360, out in all directions from the tree, but they also go straight down into the ground. And those can sometimes tap into the waters of the deep, right? The trees were definitely tapped in.
So those are going to have a hollow straw center as well, basically. At least when they're
I'll show some of that in a second. That gets back to that video I made called Spelunking Titan Trees, where guys are actually going down into these structures. You can decide for yourself if you think it's tree or sedimentary layering. Some think that this is tree. I'm undecided when it comes to the plateaus. The whole no forest on flat Earth. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Yeah, that was
plateaus, the mesas,
Yeah,
Devil's Tower. There's a lot of these stump-looking things around. I'm undecided whether those are tree. I lean towards tree, but I've seen other evidence that they could be other things. So, but the real compelling evidence for the great trees is not this. Everyone who's trying to debunk the great tree phenomenon by citing reasons that this is not a tree, they need to go after the real evidence.
I agree.
That's my opinion, because they're not doing that. So some trees have water channels going through them. There's all kinds of different ways in which trees, this would have been underground. This is the root structure. So you can imagine if this was gigantic, how would that have?
Yeah.
There'd be tunneling systems everywhere.
Yeah.
This is really important. The way a knot works. I showed you some photos before in the very beginning of the geology of some areas that look a heck of a lot more like tree than sedimentary layering. So I just wanted to kind of do a primer for that, because when you see this other stuff, it'll make more sense. Like this, for example, this is one of Hangman's, a screenshot from one of his videos. This chunk here would have been a gigantic one of these, right? This little chunk would have been that.
Yeah.
And this would have been a branch, a tiny, tiny, tiny little portion of a branch in one of these trees. And that's what you're seeing. The same flat cleavage, but this is all oxidized, so you don't perceive grain here, but you will in other stuff that I'm going to show you shortly. This is actually petrified tree. So now you can see the different colors are still,
okay.
this is petrified. You can see the different colors are still remaining, and you can see it's the same broken breakdown. And here the central portion hasn't eroded. And yeah, so that's more to keep in mind. So, and then tree is going to break down to forest, but petrified tree is going to break down to sandstone, sand, different kinds of even harder stone, depending on what the tree was made of, depending on how it was petrified. There's an infinite myriad of ways this can manifest, because you've got mud, you've got mineral water, you've got plasma, you've got volcanic activity with heat, you've got ash. This is such a big subject. I mean, I do live streams on this for like 3 and 4 hours because there's so much to cover. So to do it in an hour and a half is a challenge, especially when talking about the hearts. So now we're going to get into more actual petrified trees. That's considered to be the biggest petrified tree in the world, according to some website that I looked at. This is just a massive clump of quartz. And you'll see in a moment that the quartz is the petrified sap.
Yeah. Yep.
So
just saw there's gold in these trees, right?
Gold, silver, copper, platinum. This is one of the contributions that the archivist has brought. Ben and I have been talking about this stuff for about 4 years now, who we've been friends for a long time. And he's got so many of these old articles. Some of them I flashed up on the screen for people who paused and read them. You'll see that there's assays where they cut down these petrified forests. They're writing about it in plain English in these articles, and these trees have high quantity of metals in them, and they're getting like $15,000 of silver to the ton from these trees. And we're talking 100 years ago. $15,000 would be millions of dollars by today's money, right? And that is just, it's spoken of matter of factly. This is supposed to this is another one that's claimed to be the largest petrified tree in the world. So you can see it's the exact same structures that's breaking down. This would have been a tiny twig.
Yeah.
Tiny. Vitrification, this is an example of petrified tree. Now in the mainstream model, they tell us that this takes hundreds of millions of years to happen. Hundreds of millions. And then I asked them, I would ask, where's the evidence for that? Where's the proof that that's the case? That gets into all the funny business when it comes to carbon dating and all the other different dating techniques, which the mainstream, model wants you to think are uncontested and it's just settled science. And if you go back to each and every one of those, there's flaws in them, and they were hotly contested along the way. And there's PhDs in geology that are contesting each one of these things. So it's not settled science. Anytime you hear settled science, it's a lie. There's no such thing.
No,
in my opinion,
it's a contradiction.
So this is another petrified tree. This is petrified tree, vitrified petrified tree, and this is hangman. What's the difference between all those other ones I just showed,
right,
and this?
Yeah,
the only difference is size.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it. This is I can't remember the name of this kind of stone, but another example of petrified tree, and you can see how black it gets. So this gets into something known as coalification, coal, C-O-A-L, and tree turns to coal, and coal turns to obsidian, and there's this whole process by which these different elements, we got into transmutation before a bit. So here, I mean, how obvious does it have to be? This has been removed, and you can still see the color and the tree grain.
And that's
underneath
officially
all of this
stone.
This is just stone. This is all. This has all come about through sedimentary layering and millions of years and tectonic activity. That's the mainstream explanation for it all. And this is just petrified forest. And each one of these little chunks down here, if you look at it. So I think when we see agate and in geode and different things, we're looking at petrified sap. We're looking at potentially petrified fruit. There's just so much to share. And so that's petrified tree. So keep this in mind. you know, when we're looking at some of these other photographs now.
Okay, so now we're putting
so-
the official petrified trees behind us, and we're now looking at what official science would tell us are stones and sandstone.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Like that.
So here you can see the grain, right? And this is just one of countless examples that's on Hangman's channel. He's done an incredible job for us. And let's see, let me get
Whereabouts
this.
in the country is this? The Hangman stuff.
He's got a lot of stuff from let's see, North Dakota, Colorado.
Okay. Right in the middle of the country. All right.
Yeah, I think Arizona as well.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure. He's got his footage is from,
I mean,
several different states.
After looking at all those petrified wood pictures and now looking at this, I mean, like a 5-year-old wouldn't tell, you know, you'd have to indoctrinate that 5-year-old to know, no, this is different.
We didn't get into my story at all, or my background, or my awakening, or my red pills. I don't know if you know anything about my past at all.
Not really, no.
No. Okay. It's a colorful past, but anyway, yeah, I mean, as a kid, I was like, how the hell did these, you know, this stuff come about? It looks so much like it grew, like it's something that's biological. But you know, we're taught not to see that. You know, when we see a mountain like this, they're telling us that this is weird. Things are not going in the order they're in my.
That's pretty cool. What would it be like to live right there?
Let's see if sort by date. There we go. No, it's not taking these in order. What the heck? I don't get it. Let's see. Oh, I might not be sharing. You're seeing those. You're seeing all those. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
all right. I'll just take them one at a time instead of scrolling through them. So, I mean, when you see this, it's looks like to most people, it should be obvious that that's a tree.
Yeah.
Then we get into sap. And sap petrifies to quartz. Now, it also petrifies to amber, but I question the word petrification because on a hardness scale, amber is 2 to 2.5 out of 10. 10 being diamond. And the the quartz is 7 on the hardness scale.
Yeah.
Ruby is a 9. I show examples of how ruby can be made in a laboratory in videos. But here you see, in a microwave oven. So in 10 seconds in a microwave oven. So there's your instant petrification. So gold is found in coal seams. Or sorry, not coal seams, in quartz seams. And you know, that's where the best specimens of gold are found. And so they're finding large versions of this, and they're taking it out and they're crushing it up and they're harvesting the gold. And so when you see this from further away, actually, I've got a video open here. Let me just show a little bit of Hangman's stuff. While I'm looking for that, do you see these guys?
Yeah.
All right. So this is a father-son team, and they're showing a process of what's known as coalification, and they basically take wood and they put it inside of a steel pipe in a laboratory. Oh, it might not be this video. Crud. All right. Well, anyway, they this is an old video, but they take some wood and they just put it into a steel pipe, and in 2 weeks' time they turn it into solid coal. Here's another one. I'm just trying to get rid of my tabs here, but this is going back to the petrified organs thing. This is from a museum in Florence that has the work of a guy named Girolamo Segato from the turn of the century.
You like the movies.
He had the secret to petrifying not just flesh, but bone as well. And he could petrify anything. And that secret died with him.
Yeah, that's very.
But you can see that rock I showed. Can you see me right now?
Yeah.
So if you look at the backside of that rock, does
Yeah.
that look familiar?
Yeah.
So that's just something else. Girolamo Sagato and another guy named Bruno Gorini were both petrifying flesh. Secret died with him mysteriously. You know, and this gets into the whole thing of mythology. What is our real history? Is our real history our mythology? And all of these different archetypal events, is it just archetypal, or did these things actually occur? Let's see, where I had a great video of hangman's open. This is talking about how they look for gold by looking at how the trees grow, because when gold is present, the leaves are different.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I have a friend who used to. I'm going to talk about this in my next live stream. Who he was one of my buddies in college. He went to. Stop sharing for a second. He went to UCSB, where I did my undergrad studies, and he was in the geology department, I think. Can't remember what his department was, but he was looking into how plants grow when they're in the presence of explosives. And he worked on a very interesting project where they were trying to figure out how to deal with plastic landmines, because they've got these explosives that can't be detected with metal detectors. So they're a real risk to children in war-torn countries. So how do you find them? If they're made out of plastic and the explosive isn't a metal, how do you find these things? And someone had the brilliant idea to genetically modify plants that could grow in really, really harsh conditions that would change their spectroscopy, what they look like on the light spectrum, based on what minerals and things were present where they were growing. And so this guy succeeded in creating different plants that could be seeded into these areas, and then they could fly over using, I don't know, infrared photography or full spectrum photography, and they could actually see where the landmines were.
Wow.
Based on how the plants were growing, because the plants that were growing near the explosives would grow differently than the others. Wow. So it was a very fascinating project, and it's very similar to what I was just showing on the screen when it comes to the way in which they were finding gold as well. So let me find my last video here with yeah, I think, our mythology, they tell us everything in plain sight.
Yeah.
And we're just taught to believe it's fantasy or fairy tale or the beliefs of superstitious people. And I don't think that's the case at all with a lot of this stuff. So here's what I was going to show. This is a video called Quartz of Sap, presenting some of the best evidence for that. And this is hangman.
Like here, the flat edges and the random ledges, these little pieces, it's like fibers. See that? Take a good look at the way it breaks down flat. Okay, go down here one more time.
Okay, he's just going to show you what I've been showing you in his truck with
once again,
with the wood.
How large, massive, these, just the branches alone.
He's just showing the breakdown.
Yeah.
How it looks. Then he walks back up the hill.
It looks like that.
I mean, that's a tree,
If you can't see it's tree, you're experiencing cognitive dissonance.
All this hollow area here, trees like fibers, all this fell away. It was so massive. And remember, I can show it to you, but I can't understand it for you. As crazy as it sounds, the gold and quartz. The quartz is the petrified sap of all different colors from different plants, trees, bush, vegetation. The same with the quartz crystals, whether they're small or very large. It's just part of the tree, part of the sap, part of the lifeblood of the plant, tree, bush, whatever it was. Above ground, underground. It's just what happens. It's part of the tree, even the crystals. But the gold runs with the quartz. They always run together, unless they were broken out through rocks breaking and getting into a river or hard rock mining. But the gold and quartz, like copper and many other of the metals, always come from hard rock mining. They ran with the quartz, which is the petrified sap. They were in the tree. I could show it to you, but I can't understand it for you. Whatever purpose it was in God's original creation, you know, it's just kind of like Avatar. They always put truth in plain sight. You know, they plug into the trees. They're alive through the energy. But I'm not saying that we plugged into the trees, but it's something similar to that. The tree of life, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I'm telling you, this is self-evident. Quartz and gold always run together. If the quartz is the petrified sap, it's a common denominator. And I always teach in science it was deposited. It's never deposited. Deposited from where? From the highest mountain to under the ground. What could deposit it? Where did it come from? Use a little logic and common sense. Gold and silver and a lot of these minerals are found worldwide, from the top of the highest mountains to deep underground. It's all tree remains. It wasn't deposited in it. Deposited from where? You know, you can't. It don't fit. This is
Don't. And the archivist, with his articles, has shown that these petrified forests were all over, and they were huge, and they were harvested for the materials.
Yeah.
And they were used to either build our realm, or they were shipped off realm, or I can't tell you, but it's so obvious. And let me show you some of the absolute best. You know, this is a 4-foot chunk of sap, like the size of a VW car. Or, you know, maybe not that big, but you know, when you look at this, which I showed in the beginning, again, which makes more sense, that sedimentary layering formed in this fashion, and a lot of times you'll see there's no cracks. It's not like it formed flat and then curled downward. It doesn't make any sense, you know. And this is how they find these quartz veins, and then they go looking for gold. So here, this is one of the edges where it cleaves I was talking about, but you can see the edge has fallen off, and up close, you can see the micrograin in it still. I'm going to show some of the really phenomenal sites here. All the splits. So these, I mean, this is just so clearly and obviously wood. It's a wood pile, and a lot of them, they've been oxidized, but a lot of the ones that haven't, that still have their color, you get up close, you'll see the grain, which you will in a second here. Oh, now it's working. Now I can scroll through. No, never mind. Technical difficulties. So it's so obviously tree, and then that gets also into the sandstone layers. So this is part of the great cedar, and you can see the micro layering even in this. But these layers would have been just a tiny, you know, one of those colored bands that I showed you earlier.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that once you see it,
once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like, that's how I feel. Like, if I would want to drag a geologist from a university out to these places and be like, "You're telling me this isn't petrified wood? You know, explain that to me." You know, like right there, you can see like almost like the knotting.
It's exactly what it is. Here's a knot for you. Clearly a knot. Yeah. Right. The way the knot goes around, you know, it curls around, and then what's there in the center? You have the sap.
Yeah.
And Hangman's done such amazing videos when it comes to the sap. He's brought a lot of stuff home, and he shows all of the different ways in which it manifests. This is fresh sap. This is petrified sap.
Yeah.
What's the difference? One's
What
hard.
is sap? Is sap like a
one's
fruit
not.
produced by the tree? Is it like a
It's like the lifeblood of the
lifeblood
tree.
of the tree? Yeah.
Yeah, and there's two different kinds. There's xylem and phloem, phloem, and each one has a slightly different chemical constitution.
Yeah.
And then each tree has its own signature constitution of sap as well. So there's the different ways in which all of this can manifest are, in my understanding, limitless. So anyone who's looking for a simplistic answer, or is just going for, the absolutism, my answer is it's all of the above. You're going to find a little bit of everything when you look, and this is so clearly part of what was once a tree to me. Show you some of these larger sites. And if I'm going too fast, just pause these things and take them in. Hopefully this is streaming.
It's just hard to imagine what
at
I'm
1080p.
That we're looking at what officially is like rock. I mean, that's
This is
all of this looks like tree.
Yeah, oftentimes you can see the color of the wood is still there.
Yeah.
And so here you've got small trees made out of the exact same stuff, but and then you've got other chunks that are on the ground that are petrified. It really is as above, so below.
Yeah. I mean, that one you can you can see the grain. See the grain on all of this.
Yeah. And the slam dunk is that in some of these videos, I'm not going to go looking for it, but Mike Hangman has gone up to something like this, and he's pulled off a section like this.
Yeah.
And when he pulls it off, it's still fibrous on the inside.
Wow.
So it's still got the color of the wood, and it's
Yeah.
still fibrous. It's not turned entirely to stone.
Yeah.
But the further you go left, the more stone it is, and then you get the oxidization.
Yeah.
So it's showing all the different manifestations all in one specimen. And like I said, it's
Wonder
for
how
the
long
people
that was.
the people that see this stuff and deny it, for me, it's just cognitive dissonance.
Well, if you've lived through COVID, then you've become aware of how some people will just believe whatever they're told on the TV, no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my friend Alex, my buddy, the king of truther music, conspiracy music guru. Are you familiar with him?
No, but I remember you got drunk with him recently. You were talking about you got hung over by him.
Yeah, but he's got a video called Television Watching News Believer that's done in the theme of They Live, the movie.
Yeah.
And it's one of the best music videos ever made.
Oh, I'll have to check that out.
Television Watching News Believer. You gotta see that one. So here, this would have been one of those tiny little chunks that we saw, and you can see just how magnificent it is, and up close. And there's an even better picture. This is getting into obsidian, and you can still see the grain.
Yeah.
Some is vitrified, and some
it's just like what you were talking about, how in the book of Enoch they were describing felled trees that were already in the process of decomposition, and then they were petrified in like a state of partial decomposition. I mean, that's like exactly what it looks like.
Yeah, so this would have been like the outer ring of a stump that would stretch around, and only, some portions of that would have remained. And obviously this would have been broken and torn off in Cataclysm.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas the stumps might have been taken down.
Right.
And, that's a whole, I've got a little video called Felling Titanic Trees, getting into the mythology a little bit and presenting some different theories about if they were trees, why do they look like that? How did it come about? And that's a fun one. So this is a sandstone layer where people would have carved in and made dwellings. If they were carving into the sandstone, I believe they carved in when they were, you know, when they were still wood, as we
Wood, yeah.
discussed before. And then
Especially if
this
they were in
isn't,
the process of decomposition, you know, like it would have been easy and cozy.
yeah. So now this would have, to me, this would have been like where the tree trunk starts to slope upward.
Okay. Yeah.
And then it would eventually go vertical. And you know, they're saying this is tectonic activity, but you can see it's got a very tree-like look to it.
Yeah. That too.
This one exceptionally.
Yeah.
You can see the grain, you can see the dark, rich red color of the cedar.
It really explains all the layering way better than the official story, you know, because that's the same kind of layering you see inside of a tree.
That's the thing you were talking about in one of the podcasts I heard. You were saying how as you start to look into things like cosmology and earth shape and all of these different crackpot ideas that we're taught, you know, only the foolish would ever even consider,
Yeah.
that it dovetails, like everything starts to fit together. You know, the earth shape thing, I think flat earth is a term that is it creates schisms.
Yes, it puts
know,
an
and it
image in
creates
people's heads
division.
of a saucer floating in space with water flowing off the sides, which is unfortunate, when really all people are saying is that the surface that we're on is flat.
Yeah, it measures flat. We don't know how far it goes.
Yeah.
We don't know what's beyond the Antarctic ice wall.
Yeah.
We don't know, you know, I mean, I personally identify with the whole toroidal shape, because we were talking about the heart and its
that makes
toroidal
sense.
vortex.
Yeah.
And that's how the cells are. That's how the magnets are. That's how plasma physics is.
Yeah.
All of these things have the exact same manifestation. So I don't see any reason why our realm wouldn't also. So that I identify more as a toroid earther, but on the accretion disk, which is flat, which would be, you know, if you look into magnetics, let's see. Electric. There we go. Something not so much like that. That's kind of mixing models with the NASA space model. But this is the diagram of the magnetic
That's what
flow.
you mean when you say toroidal.
This green line here is what's known as the accretion disk, and that would be like a flat pizza, right? And then this is how all magnets are. If you look at a magnet, it's got the exact same.
That would definitely explain what we can measure in our world, in our realm of the magnetism.
Everything grows this way. We have this, you know, this is looking down on a magnet, a ring magnet, I believe. This is looking at it from the side, the poles you can see. I think that our heart is doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And you know, you get into you were talking about the Merkaba before. Did you read the books by Drunvalo Melchizedek?
Yes, that's where
the Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life.
Yep.
You know, he talks about stuff that lines up with this as well. These are the fulgurites that we were talking about before, where electricity hits sand.
Yeah.
This is how lightning, this is blood vessels, but this is how lightning works as well, in the same fashion. It all works in this way. And this is looking at the different flows of a magnet, but this is how the heart flows as well. So isn't that just a coincidence, you know, that it all lines up so nicely? So I for a long time, after Alex introduced me to the idea of flat Earth, it took me months to wrap my head around it and lots of study. And I kept trying to come back and debunk him. And finally, it was seeing Ibiza off the coast of where I live, 90 kilometers away, and photographing the entire island with nothing missing with my phone. I didn't even have powerful optics. That was kind of a game changer for me, because at 90 kilometers, 60 miles, you're supposed to have 200 meters. 200 meters
is what does it for me. Like, I mean, I love the subject, and there's a lot of different things that I love about it, but curvature is really all I need to debunk the heliocentric model.
No curve, no ball.
Yeah.
This is looking at gold and how it manifests, always in the quartz seams.
Gold is something like that's very interesting that they're finding it in these giant petrified trees. I'm going to call them trees now. Because gold is that's according to, Zachariah Stitchin's translations of the Sumerian text. That's what the Anunnaki were after. The whole.
Yeah, and the human race was bred to basically mine for gold.
Yeah.
Yeah, potentially. I think there's a lot that, I'm not so sure about a lot of the stuff Sitchin said, but
No, me neither. Have you looked into the
yeah.
monatomic gold stuff about the scientific studies done on monatomic?
Yeah, there's a guy named Bernie I know, Crypto Alchemist is his channel, and he's working with that stuff all the time.
Really?
He's a hands-on guy that's
Check it
got
out.
all these jars in his bedroom and the room that he streams in with all this stuff that's he's looking into that deep. So here you can see limestone, quartz, and the gold. And it's all layered, almost like blood vessel.
Yeah.
So we haven't even talked about Titans. We could do a whole stream on Titans if you.
We'll have to do another stream.
That.
I really wanted to introduce you to my listeners who don't know about you and meet you and talk to you and stuff. The gold is so fascinating to me because when you think about this, when you think about, I'm going to edit in a clip that you showed from someone else's video that shows like Google Earth, like a 8-mile diameter Titan tree, or, remnants of one. So when you think about these trees, like these avatar-sized trees, even bigger, miles high, and then you think about the gold that's found in them, such a minuscule amount of gold, compared to the size of these trees. To us, it's a lot of gold, but I mean, it's just so magical to me. Like, and then you think about it's in the sap, so it's in the lifeblood. And then it makes me think of like once again the yoga teachers about the ojas, tejas, and the sort of the magical components that we can produce inside of our endocrine system, the magical fluids within us, which is in tiny amounts. I wonder if that's what the gold.
I think the gold and the silver. I think that this is maybe part of the tree's nervous system.
Yeah,
and that it's has to do with signaling and transmission.
Yep. Exactly. That's kind of where I'm
possible going back. This is a bigger quartz seam coming down through here. So this is what the miners would be looking for if they were going in search of gold. This gets into the transmutation of elements, because some people talk about a silica era where the great trees were once alive, but everything was made out of silica, because that's what we're finding. The stone is all silica. I don't necessarily subscribe to that idea. I think it's more likely that there was that the trees got hit with
I think you're
plasma,
right.
something powerful, and then it transmuted into those elements. Now it's possible also, like if you think about the Avatar footage, the movie Avatar, they've got this glowing realm where everything is bioluminescent and it's giving off its own light, including the trees. And I think that is probably truth in plain sight. And it may be that some of these trees had the radioactive materials already present, that they were producing radium, uranium, plutonium in trace amounts in the trees themselves while they were alive. And as a result, they were powering the whole realm and they were giving off all kinds of light. But it's equally as possible that plasma could have hit and transmuted whatever element. You have to look at the periodic table and all these, there's lots of different theories about how one thing would transmute to another. I mean, this is alchemy. This is what the alchemists were trying to do, right? Transmute different elements from one element to another. And I just showed a bunch of examples of all the different ways in which sap manifests in fresh trees. Lots of different colors. There's green sap, there's blue sap.
And that's transmutation. If we're to accept this, which our eyes are telling us is true, that this is petrified sap, what that means is that the sap was transmuted into another. Like I was looking this up online. I was looking up the chemical composition of sap, and the chemical composition of quartz, and they're different, which means there was a transmutation, which happens.
Yeah.
People can do that
That-
in labs today with certain things.
Yeah, that reminds me of something I was going to mention. Let's see, right? Yeah, so there's a physicist named Anthony Peratt. He's looking a lot at plasma physics and how that would transmute elements as well. We talked about plasmoids, or creating diamonds and rubies, microwave, all that. You got the Medusa in mythology, turning
Yeah.
things to stone. You've got Cthulhu, which is this like octopus-like creature with the tendrils that comes
Yes.
down and wreaks destruction on the earth. You've got what else?
I think this looks like
Cthulhu.
Cthulhu more than an elephant. Now that you mentioned Cthulhu,
Some have said it's got a squid-like look to
was
it.
like, yeah, and that's just because of the side things coming off.
I'll do a little teaser for people who don't know anything about this. So this is the Unveiling a Titan playlist. The first 6 parts. The first one is just an overview to what David Weiss called something more disruptive than flat Earth, as far if it's true. He thought it was, he struggled with this one for a while. The first one is just an overview. Second one goes into the eye, which is what you see here, which is looking a hell of a lot like an eye socket. There's over 20 different anatomical correlations with this cave alone. 20.
Including inside of it.
Inside.
Yeah.
Like our eye sockets are made of 6 or 7 different bones that meet in what are known as sutures. And then you have fissures, which are openings in those sutures where the optic nerve goes and the blood vessels go. So the curved orbital, the eye socket, is made of 7 different bones. Those bones have meeting points that are called sutures. Those sutures are in that cave.
Yeah.
We also have other little holes, like here we have one called the below orbital foramen, which is where blood vessels go in the maxilla and nerve as well. Well, in an elephant, which I present the idea that may have been a petrified elephant, this is lying down. You can see there's no legs there, it's not standing up, and its head is tilted this way. And so in an elephant, that hole is here. And so if that head were to tilt this way, that would bring that in front of the eye socket.
Yeah.
And there's actually a cave right there,
Yeah.
exactly where it should be, which you can see. It's probably tiny, but right there is that cave. So
Yeah.
there's so many things that line up. Second video is about the eye. The third video is about the ear. Turns out you can't see it from here, but there's a quarter moon discoloration that looks like an ear was pulled away, and it's reddish everywhere in that section. And then right at the central portion of that is a cave.
Yep.
And that cave, at the time that it was excavated and examined by geologists, I can't tell what year it was the most thoroughly excavated cave in all of Europe. They went in with 3D mapping. They found bodies. They found cave paintings. And they did 3D mapping of the interior of the cave structure. Guess what it looks like? It's a mind blow.
Yeah.
This one I pull out my my anatomy books and start thinking about bone and tissues and the different structures of them and how would that compare to what I was finding on the mountain. These two are an overview, just quick for people who are short on time and want to get it, but they're like 3 years old, so there's a ton of information that's come in since then. But just to tease people a little bit, we can do a little. This is a 90-second video I made. Might not be. Am I sharing the sound?
Yeah.
All right. Hey. Come on. There we go. I'll just pause there for a second. Those cave paintings look like an elephant with
Yeah.
horns,
It's named after an
and a
elephant, right?
deluge coming down.
Oh, yeah.
Some call it the elephant, affectionately,
Yeah.
but its name is Montgo. It's on the Costa Blanca in Spain.
Okay.
And it doesn't mean elephant.
Okay.
So this is all limestone, and I talk a lot about limestone in my series.
Today on my podcast, when I was talking to people to look forward to this conversation we're having, I asked them to watch it. I said, if you want to test your open mind, check out. I thought it was only 4 parts, so I guess there's 2 more parts, but I recommend everyone watch this series.
And don't get hung up on the first one, because that's really just meant as an overview to introduce. It's the first video I ever made.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch in that video that I would do differently, and a bunch of pictures I would leave out. It was the whole idea was new to me. I mulled this over for about 6 months to a year before I even made the first video. And then this is where the evidence is presented. There's over 55 correlations with anatomy.
Yes.
I don't know if if you do the math on that,
Yeah.
like what are the odds?
It's a very good series.
From aerial, the actual macro anatomy, with the head shape, cutouts where the neck are, ribs are present. There's a big crevice right between where the legs are. It's just like one thing after another.
Yeah.
At first, I thought I was in the Twilight Zone when I started looking into this, because it was just so bizarre. And I'm like, I started telling my friend Alex about it, and he's like, you got to make videos about this. And then I went with him to the Flat Earth Conference in 2018 in Denver, and he was the headliner. He did the closing night performance.
Oh, nice.
Singing his music.
Oh,
And
nice.
it was awesome. And I met a lot of really great people there, and I got to show Bob Nodell and Dave Weiss, and people are just like, I was just showing them pictures on my phone at that point. And doing, like with Google Earth, I had it on the phone, and I was able to zoom around and show them the macro anatomy, because that's how it started for me. It was a harebrained idea initially. I got onto the Titans with Jade Dreamers, and Mud Fossil University was talking about his 1,000-mile dragon in the Sahara. And
you've been guided spiritually or serendip. You know what I'm saying? Like once you go through in my opinion, once you go through the whole thing, it's obvious that you've been.
Yeah, here I've got one more Heartstone synchronicities, but if you go to the live streams, there's a video I did on the synchronicity stream, and this is a stupendous storytelling session. That's one of my absolute favorite videos. There's a lot of personal stories in there that have to do with synchronicity, and some of them will cause your jaw to hit the floor. I promise you'll be blown away. The whole thing, if it wasn't for synchronicity, I wouldn't have kept going with this. It was just one thing after another presented itself to me, and I just had to keep going where the energy led me.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. Wrapping up, Mike, what this leaves me thinking is like, so now when I look at the world through this lens, I see a time in the history where there were these massive giant trees, these titan creatures, giants. And I mean, it's just unbelievable. It makes me think, like, right now we're just in almost like a desert land, and we're these tiny little creatures that are left over in this deserted wasteland that was once the Garden of Eden. And at the same time, I think that
It's still a garden.
It's still a garden. I love my life, and I love being here, and I agree with you. It is magical. It is a garden.